I'm Mike.
I'm Sam. Let's get into it.
It is becoming something very, very special. Rondo with the fake. Oh, what a beauty.
Welcome to episode 34. Today we're going to do another similar free-form discussion, kind of like the one we had last episode. I think that one was really well for both of us. We had a good time making it. So this topic that we're going to start off out of the NBA world is Rajon Rondo of the Los Angeles Lakers breaking his thumb, and he's potentially out 6 to 8 weeks. So for the Lakers, this is pretty detrimental because 6 to 8 weeks will take them to the second round, I believe.
Yeah.
And, I mean, the Lakers already have Avery Bradley out of the lineup because he's opting out to play, and now they have Rondo. So that just puts a lot more weight on LeBron James' shoulders for this playoff run.
Yeah, I think like the worst that's going to happen with the timetable is that he would be back for game 2 of the Western Conference Finals. So, I mean, that would mean he would miss the first 2 rounds entirely, and he misses off on a lot of chemistry building with his teammates. I mean, he hasn't played for the Lakers in 3-4 months. He hasn't played with these guys in a while. Rajon Rondo has had kind of nagging hand injuries his entire career, so not really surprised to see this happen. I think his hands, like Kevin Love's in a sense with Cleveland, are a bit fragile at this point, and when they get hit in practice, like it just happened, or in game, there's always a chance of that happening. But I think it's a really big blow when you consider Avery Bradley's gone as well, because Rajon Rondo, while he's not the best defender, I mean, for a guy that's 6 foot, 6'1", he's as good as it's going to get. He's a very smart defender. He just knows where passing lanes are, things of that nature. He's a good team defender, and more importantly, he's just the most proven playoff caliber player that this Lakers squad has, of course, outside of LeBron James. We've seen playoff Rondo be a real thing in the past couple of years, especially for the Pelicans. He was really the reason why they were so successful in the playoffs, especially against the Bulls not too recently. And I know they were going to win the next series they had, but Rondo, of course, went down with an injury, which I think is kind of a common occurrence in his career. So definitely a big blow for the Lakers.
Yeah, not to mention that, like the Pelicans Trailblazers series where they were able to upset the Trailblazers because Rondo was just feeding Anthony Davis. But I think a point that's really important to see is with Rondo out and Bradley out, we talked about this kind of off camera, but LeBron has to be the major ball handler for this Los Angeles Lakers. They don't really have another person to take up the ball and kind of have the passing ability that a Rajon Rondo would have. So it's just extra weight on LeBron's shoulders for this playoff run.
Yeah, it's going to be absolutely huge. Now, Rondo, I see a lot of people saying this could be a good thing because it will mean more minutes to LeBron, but is LeBron ready to play 40 minutes a game, 43 minutes a game, 44 minutes a game? I'm not sure because Rondo is that guy. He's really like the relief pitcher for a MLB team where he's going to play the bottom of the first quarter, the start of the second quarter, bottom of the third quarter, start of the fourth quarter, minutes where you want LeBron to sit, you want LeBron to rest up for key stretches in the basketball game, but now LeBron's going to have to do that. There's nobody else on this roster who has taken up the ball at a consistent rate throughout their entire NBA career. The only one who I can think of besides Rajon Rondo, of course, is Avery Bradley, who took up the ball when Isaiah Thomas was out for the Celtics in their playoff run where Isaiah Thomas was 5th in MVP voting that year. But again, with the subtraction of Rondo, I don't think it's too huge, but considering Avery Bradley's out as well, your 2 just playoff proven talents besides LeBron are out. I mean, these guys are even more playoff proven than Anthony Davis in a sense. So, I mean, with the lack of leadership, you're going to have guys like Alex Caruso, who's very unproven, play some big minutes. I mean, even J.R. Smith, who they just added, play at least 10 minutes a game. So it's just looking really uncertain for the Lakers and looking worse and worse for them by the day, honestly.
Yeah, and a lot of weight placed on someone like Danny Green and J.R. Smith, who have more playoff experience than the majority of the roster, I think. And also, the point of even having J.R. Smith take up the ball, I think that would be extremely detrimental. I think he would get so sloppy and poor passing judgment that would really hurt the Lakers as well. So it's just interesting to see what kind of game plan they're going to go in with once the playoffs start.
Yeah, and just also defensively, I'm just nervous who's going to guard the opposing guards because, I mean, the Lakers, I think they're going to finish as the 1 seed. I'd be very surprised if they dropped. I think that's the most solidified playoff spot out of any playoff team in any seeding. I know the Western Conference is very close, but even the Lakers, I think, have a pretty strong 5 to 6 game command on that 1 seed. So I'm going to be interested to see, are they going to play a team like the Memphis Grizzlies who have really good guard play in Ja Morant? Are they going to play a team like the Pelicans who also have very, very good guard play with Lonzo Ball and Drew Holiday, of course? Even a team like the Trailblazers could potentially be an absolute matchup nightmare for this Lakers team because, again, Damian Lillard's going to get 30 against this team. CJ McCollum is going to get 30 against this team. And could the rest of the Trailblazers roster just be strong enough to muster out 40 points, 45 points without, of course, Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum adding to that mix? So, again, I think potential disastrous playoff matchups for this Lakers team.
Yeah, I think with this new Rondo news, even if he comes back for Western Conference Finals, I think the Lakers are kind of put a fork in them. I think they're not going to win the championship this year. I thought with kind of Avery Bradley, I was a little skeptical if they were going to be able to win the championship, but I did still have faith in them. But now with Rondo out, I don't even know if the second round might be a bloodbath for them, honestly.
Yeah, the second round is a very key round for the Lakers. If they play a team like the Rockets, I mean, it's going to be trouble. Even if they play a team like the Nuggets, who I know they revolve around their center, of course, Nikola Jokic, but they have very, very deep depth at the guard positions with Jamal Murray, of course, Will Barton, but they also have just very good talent at that guard position. But again, it's going to be really interesting. Potentially, I think that the second round is going to be harder than the Western Conference Finals for the Lakers, which I think is really interesting because going into the year, it was, the Clippers are by far the toughest matchup for the Lakers. But now, kind of looking at the matchup, I don't think that's the case. I think that, again, teams like the Trailblazers, teams like the Nuggets, teams like the Rockets are even tougher because they really exploit the Lakers' weaknesses, which the Clippers, it's kind of just fire against fire. But with some of these other teams, it's water against fire. So it's going to be really interesting for the Lakers.
Yeah, those teams with fast, really shifty guards is really going to really hurt the Lakers. Like you said, the Rockers, Trailblazers. But I want to backtrack to the Nuggets. I have a question for you. Obviously, you've probably seen the pictures of Jokic now. He's lost a tremendous amount of weight. Do you think that's kind of hurt his game a little bit because him being kind of a thicker man in the paint, that's kind of oriented his game? So do you think him getting skinnier kind of hurts his play style a little bit?
I really do. I really am kind of opposed to Nikola Jokic. I don't know why I can't pronounce his name today, but I'm really opposed to him losing a lot of weight because, I mean, we even saw him in that Trailblazers series last year. I know he's big. I know he's kind of considered quote-unquote overweight. It looks like he has a little bit of baby fat on him even. But, I mean, he proved that he's in great shape. He could play 45 minutes. He could play 50 minutes in a playoff game, which is absolutely huge. Go out the next 2 days, and play another game and be really big in that game. So stamina and just endurance has never been a problem for him. So, I mean, considering his game, he's honestly a very bad defender. He has no lateral quickness whatsoever. And I really just see that being a natural born kind of athleticism thing. I don't see that improving with a weight loss necessarily. And yeah, his game is really revolved around him being so big, him being such a great large presence in the paint. Even his body sucks in so many other defenders, and he's such a great passer, just passing out of double teams in that sense. And so, yeah, I think it will be pretty big because I think now guys like JaVale McGee could body him pretty easily if he lost a considerable amount of weight. Just guys who aren't considered to be able to guard him, but could now potentially guard him.
Yeah, and then just with the weight and all, it's just he's able to body defenders, and that just gives him an extra boost above someone who he's playing. But like with him losing weight, it's not like he added muscle mass. He just looks considerably skinnier. So I think that's a a big downgrade because even if he added muscle, he would be bigger than people just with not fat, but he would have muscle instead. So I think I'm intrigued to see how he's gonna perform, but I think it's gonna be kind of he's gonna reel back a little bit and not be kind of the Jokic he once was. Obviously, his passing is still gonna be there because that's something that's natural, but just him bodying defenders, I think that's gonna be a thing of the past.
Yeah, the Nuggets certainly they are a very good roster. I know they surprised a lot of people last season, not this season necessarily. I think they were, third in the West last season, had a great season. But again, I think it really shows with the lack of the Joker's kind of killer instinct. Jamal Murray not really taking that next step you want to see a max contract player take. And just Gary Harris taking a huge step back. He's been a huge disappointment the last 2 seasons. I really do think they just need that third star to really solidify them as a championship contender. A guy like Jimmy Butler last offseason I think would have been great for this team. I mean, we'll see with the future of Michael Porter Jr. I know one of the most hyped prospects coming out of high school in a considerable amount of time. Didn't really do anything at Mizzou.
Yeah,
at his time there. Yeah, he was pretty
chronic back
injured.
injuries though.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's still nagging him. He hasn't really found a great role in this rotation yet. I think they don't really know how to use him too efficiently yet. But again, I think this Nuggets team is a team they can win first round, but I think whoever faces them are going to give them a really tough matchup. And going into the second round, I see a team like the Clippers. I see a team like the Lakers even with just more firepower, just beating them pretty easily and pretty considerably.
Yeah, I think the biggest knock on the Nuggets, it's not even a knock really. It's just they're so young. Their average age is like 24, I think. Paul Millsap is the oldest, and I think he's just above 30. So I think they just lack experience in playoffs. So, I mean, I think a couple years down the road, once LeBron's kind of on a downward spiral, like not at his peak like he is right now, but I think and see the Nuggets becoming that top seed in the Western Conference, but I do think they need another player to kind of complement the Joker because, like you said, they have so many great players, but they're more or less glorified role players because there's not like that bona fide star on their team.
Yeah, and the point you kind of made with the LeBron and the Lakers, I really don't think it's an East situation where, man, you might as well scrap your entire championship hopes if you're a team in the East for the next 10 years when LeBron went to the Heat because he's going to be ruling the East for the next 10 years, no matter what happens, no matter who you have on your roster. I really don't think that's the case with the Lakers and LeBron going into the 2020s. I still think if you're a Western Conference team like the Nuggets, you still should gear towards trying to win a championship rather than kind of build for the future, just because I think the Lakers organization, quite honestly, is horrible at this point. I mean, with Jeannie Buss running the show, she's absolutely horrible. I mean, I was just kind of reliving that Kobe after he tore his Achilles and just that entire situation. The Buss family really just ruined the end of Kobe's career because of the mismanagement of that entire situation. Now, I know Chris Paul, that's a whole different story for another day. If they had Chris Paul, they potentially could have been good in the mid 2010s. As we all know, they were very abysmal. They're rolling out no-name squads every single day with Kobe. I mean, the biggest free agent splash they made out of the entire tenure with Kobe after he won his last championship was Dwight Howard, who didn't end up working out for them. They also got Jeremy Lin after Linsanity, who Kobe really did not like during Linsanity. And while he was on the team, there's a very funny video of Lin kind of like
waving him off.
Yeah, waving off Kobe and then taking the final shot. But again, I really am just not confident in the Buss family just building around LeBron properly, having a good roster around him. They'll have their stars come here and there. But again, it's really just Anthony Davis and LeBron James. And really that's it. Even Kyle Kuzma, I think, has proven at this point to be not even an average NBA starter. I think he can be a solid guy off the bench. But again, the Lakers, I think, year in and year out until LeBron retires or LeBron switches teams is going to be very vulnerable, honestly. And I think a superior team with superior overall talent could beat this team, even though they have 2 superstars. So, again, for the Nuggets, I would just say try to find that third star, and you could be a championship team.
I mean, even if they kind of we talked about age, but if they figure out some way to trade up in the draft and get a star in this, like, I'm skeptical about LaMelo Ball, but if they do get a good guard like LaMelo Ball, a tall guard that can shoot, that might even be good for the team too. But I don't know if they're willing to trade up in the draft like that.
Yeah, certainly. I think they're like a really solid wing player, somebody taller than a guard. Obviously, LaMelo Ball. I think he's about 6'7" at this point, which is really legit height once you start to get into it. I know Karis LeVert is 6'7". That's a very valuable kind of height to be in the NBA because you can run the point, you can run the shooting guard, you can even run the small forward, which again, that's very valuable. But if they got a guy like Avery Bradley, not Avery Bradley, but Bradley Beal, for instance, I think that could be really effective for this basketball team. Even a guy like Devin Booker, just to add that scoring punch, because this team does have very good team defense, but that's because of guys like Gary Harris. Once you get that third star, if he can't really defend like a Devin Booker, you're teetering on having a bad defense because Jamal Murray, not the best defender, and the Joker, a very poor defender. So, again, you have to be very careful with the defensive kind of versatility here. That's kind of why they have Paul Millsap, because I know he's still old. He's still pretty effective offensively, but more than anything, he's a really good defender. So, again, they need to surround the Joker and Jamal Murray with more defensive talent, but better offensive talent as well.
Yeah, moving on to the East. I'm going to talk about a little bit about the East. I was watching Colin Cowherd, and he kind of said the Celtics were a dark horse to win the NBA championship. He only had three. He had teams outside of the bubble, and then only three teams inside the bubble that he would consider championship teams. Those were the Celtics, Clippers, and Bucks. So, do you think the Celtics have enough kind of players and pedigree in their roster to be able to win this championship?
I guess I could say they're a dark horse candidate. I wouldn't say they're one of my favorites to win the championship, especially coming out of the East. The problem with the Celtics, I have two major problems with the Celtics. One really is their lack of big men. I mean, we saw really the East be ruled last year by big men, the 76ers. I mean, I think the 76ers would have beaten the Celtics last year in the playoffs. The Bucks, of course, they did beat the Celtics in the playoffs last year. And then, of course, the Raptors, who are still legit title contenders. I still think they match up better against some teams like the Bucks per se. But again, you have Thesis running the 5. I mean, he's a stretch 4, stretch 5. You don't really ideally feel comfortable with him running that 5 spot. He's very under-centered for a big man. I mean, he's a pretty decent shooter outside, but besides that, your other guy you have is Ennis Cantor, who I think his minutes even started to drop off by the end of the season before quarantine. I think he was kind of falling out of favor with Brad Stevens. He's just very stiff. I mean, he's just kind of another body out there. I mean, I think it was a huge, huge, huge loss for this team losing Al Horford in the offseason. He was just such a great big man, so versatile, such a really good passer as well, just very good defensively. He matched up against Joel Embiid so well, and then obviously he goes and joins Joel Embiid. I think Al Horford, again, another topic for another day, very bad contract. I think by year 3 it's going to be a very bad value contract for the 76ers. But going on to the Celtics a little bit, again, their lack of big men and their just lack of just length is just really going to hurt them. They run Gordon Hayward at the 4 sometimes, which, I mean, they're going to get absolutely destroyed by a team like the 76ers, who just recently came out and said they're going to be running Ben Simmons at the 4, who could dominate Gordon Hayward offensively and defensively. And you have Joel Embiid, you have Al Horford. I mean, that's just going to be disastrous for the Celtics once they reach a level where they're going to have to play Pascal Siakam. They're going to have to play Joel Embiid. They're going to have to play Giannis Antetokounmpo.
Yeah, I think they're kind of their plus on their team is their quickness, because they do run. They have Kemba at point guard, and they have so many wing players, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Gordon Hayward. But I think that would work if they're in the Western Conference, because that's just not dominant by big men. Just the Eastern Conference, like you said, 76ers, Bucks, Raptors, they just have so many tall, lanky big men, and I just think that it would be so hard to match up against them, because I think, like you said, they would just get bodied down low. Even if they do have shooting, even if they are faster, I think just these teams would beat them so easily in the paint and so handling the paint. that I think I wouldn't even consider the Celtics going to be in the bubble. I think maybe since it is kind of I mean, it's going to be one of the hardest playoff runs of all time, so I could see them taking advantage and being able to make the NBA Finals, but I don't see the Celtics. I'll see them being in the Eastern Conference Finals. I think that's the farthest they'll go.
Yeah, me too. I mean, barring kind of just an absolute meltdown by a superstar player on an opposing team or just a meltdown of an entire team in general, I just don't think, again, the Celtics really match up against Western Conference teams well. You made a really good point there, but they don't match up against Eastern Conference teams well whatsoever. They're one of the best perimeter defensive teams in the NBA right now, if not the very best perimeter defensive team in the league. I mean, you have Marcus Smart. He's going to be defensive all first team, I believe. Jaylen Brown's a really good defender. But
Grant Williams, great defender.
Very good defender as well. Even Jason Tatum could be good defensively at times. But my second concern with this basketball team is going to be Kemba Walker, because we see historically that short guards in the playoffs really struggle. We've seen Kemba Walker in the playoffs, I believe, twice throughout his career. Kind of unfair. I mean, he's gotten blown out in both of those playoff runs. I mean, that's going to be expected with the organization, the Bobcats, and then the Hornets, of course. So I wouldn't hold too much weight into that. But his play style, really his inefficiency, especially this season, really just suggests that he's not going to be that effective of a playoff basketball player, because he's still going to potentially get you 20 points a game. He's still going to contribute in that way. But again, he's a real defensive liability, and he's going to be taking shots away from guys who simply have just been more efficient than him this season. I know his playmaking is going to be big for this team too. Some of his leadership qualities is going to be big, but I mean, you even got a 3-year guy like Jason Tatum who has more playoff experience at this point than Kemba Walker, so I don't even really think they need him in that aspect. So again, I always say this: if the Celtics right now could swap Al Horford for Kemba Walker, I'm not sure if their organization would do that, but certainly me, if I was the coach or GM of the Celtics, I would certainly do that right now.
Yeah, I mean, Kemba Walker, just the lack of playoff experience is just, I think that's going to be really hard for him. It's going to show a lot. Obviously, he has one of the most magical NCAA tournaments of all time, so he does have some kind of postseason play in his back pocket, but I mean, this is going to be a truly grueling and testing playoff because it is so far from when the last time they played. So I think there is going to be some rust, and teams are going to be ready for kind of his quick slashing play style, especially against the long, lanky Eastern Conference. I think he's going to get over-dominated by some of these teams.
Yeah, and some of these teams have really good guard defenders, short guard defenders who typically aren't going to be good against your tall point guards, your tall shooting guards, but Kemba Walker's small. So once he starts getting matched up with guys like Kyle Lowry, I think Kyle Lowry could do a great job defensively against him. Once he starts getting up against guys like Eric Bledsoe, who's one of the best short defenders in the NBA in a long time, quite frankly. He's been absolutely abysmal in the playoffs recently, Eric Bledsoe. I mean, just absolutely laying a dud after dud. But again, he's still really, really good defensively. I think he can absolutely neutralize Kemba Walker. So, I mean, just looking at the Eastern Conference again, even teams like Miami, unless you're facing Goran Dragic for a long stretch, I mean, you're going to be facing lanky defenders. So, again, for Kemba, I'm just very nervous. I would be very nervous as a Celtics fan, and just as a guy, I mean, I'm not a Celtics fan, but as a guy who roots for Kemba Walker in general, I'm just nervous to see him potentially get exposed in this playoff run.
Yeah, I think he's going to get exposed. I think, honestly, I would swap the Celtics out of the bubble and replace them with the Raptors, because I'm confident that the Raptors they have great coaching, they have great players, they play as a unit. Obviously they lost Kawhi, so they don't have that star, but they have great coaching, great just roster, and then they have great management. So I can see them being in the finals again.
I really can too. They're really the dark horse I would ride if I had to bet in Vegas, and I have $1,000 payout if I throw down $200. I think it would be the Raptors to bet on, because this team, the real concern with this team is they don't lack that oh, I haven't scored in 4 minutes and the other team hasn't scored in 4 minutes. I need somebody to just really break the ice and start our offense to get going again. We need a momentum swing. We need, oh, the other team's on a 10-point run. We need somebody to just isolate, post up, and score. That's what Kawhi Leonard was for last season. That's why the Raptors were so great last season, made such a magical run because they really had the roster around Kawhi to the point where Kawhi didn't even have to score 30 a game. I know he scored so many points in the playoffs last year, but they won so many games where Kawhi only scored 20 points on pretty poor efficiency. So again, they're lacking a superstar like that. But defensively, I mean, there's no way to put it. They're just a great defensive team, so no really worries there. And just really the worry is Marc Gasol. I know he got skinnier too. Going off the Joker point, I know Marc Gasol got skinnier. Is he going to be an X factor? Is he going to be effective? Can he get you 15 points a game? Is Kyle Lowry going to be able to get you 16 points tonight like he did last season in the playoffs? And are other players going to step up? I know OG Anunoby has really stepped into the Kawhi Leonard role, obviously not offensively, but defensively pretty well. So it's going to be about Pascal Siakam too, ultimately. He played so great in the playoffs last year. What do you have, 35 points in the first game of the NBA Finals last year? Really outplayed Kawhi Leonard, in my opinion, for the majority of the NBA Finals games. I thought you can make an argument that he deserved Finals MVP over Kawhi Leonard, but of course, just because of the narrative, the magical playoff run Kawhi had, he played better than him in all of the playoff series except the finals, in my opinion. But anyway, again, if Pascal Siakam could get you 25 a night in the playoffs, this team could easily be a championship team.
And then the point I made with them lacking a star, I think this playoff run could be the time that Siakam kind of catapults himself ahead of a lot of people and become kind of that bona fide star for these Raptors team and become the guy for the team.
Yeah, it's been incredible to watch his kind of evolution in the NBA. He went year one of just being just kind of a body out there. Year two, oh, he's a really good defender, actually. He could kind of shoot, but he can't really create. And then year three, I mean, he's just this crafty four that could create, just absolutely do anything. His game really reminds me of a later Blake Griffin in a sense, not in the sense of dunking, but just really good passer, just good post player who could shoot at any point in the court. So, I mean, Pascal Siakam is just a really good player. I'm excited to watch him in this playoff run.
Yeah, and that just shows how good kind of the coaching is for the Raptors, how they were able to develop Siakam so well, and also the management. His name is escaping me, the GM, but he's great at finding talent. Obviously, he has some African roots, so he does have that connection with Siakam. But yeah. I just hats off to the Raptors. They lost Kawhi, obviously it's so big, and then they're able to just come back right away and become a championship caliber team.
That's why I feel like some teams, some organizations like the Toronto Raptors, who, I mean, they're out of Toronto. No American basketball player is going to want to play for Toronto. So that's why I really think some of those organizations are better than some of the big markets, because you can't be complacent if you're the Toronto Raptors GM. You can't just be like, oh, well, we'll wait next season because we can bring in these huge free agents. They can't do that. They don't have the luxury of attracting free agents. So they're always on the move. They're always scouting talents, always trying to get draft gems, always trying to get players from overseas, from Africa, from these different countries. They're just always trying to make trades, make moves to make their team better. Then you look at a team like the Lakers, you look at a team like the New York Knicks. They're so complacent. They do absolutely nothing all season. And then once the offseason hits, oh, we're in the Big Apple. Oh, we're in LA. We can attract superstar talent. So that's why I really think a team like the Raptors just are so much a better organization than some of these big market teams, because, again, they can't be complacent, because if they are, they're just going to be horrible.
Yeah, the Raptors are willing to trade DeMar DeRozan, kind of the cornerstone of their franchise, in order to win a championship, and then the New York Knicks they hired the actor from The Sopranos to try to sign LeBron James. That just shows the difference between the two organizations.
Oh my gosh, that story is absolutely insane. I mean, the New York Knicks, they've just been such a poorly run organization. I was watching a compilation of Stephen A. Smith the other day, just absolutely lambasting the New York Knicks. It's just so unfortunate that the Big Apple's team is so kind of incompetent, really.
Yeah, I feel like I think that's the trend for a lot of sports. If you look at all the leagues, kind of for some reason the New York sports teams are not the greatest. Obviously, you can exclude the Yankees because they have the highest odds to win the World Series, but Giants suck, Jets pretty much suck, Islanders, Rangers they're decent, but New York has been deprived of good sports teams for quite some time.
Yeah, I really don't know why that is. I guess like the overarching theme of it is what I would say is that all these franchises are respectively top 5, top 10, if not the number one highest valued franchise in their respective sports. Certainly the Yankees are, certainly teams like the Knicks, despite them being horrible, I think they're still top 5 valued just NBA team in the world. So, I mean, I just think that they have these kind of billionaire owners that end up purchasing the team. Obviously, James Dolan, he purchased the team in the 90s. So just guys who are looking to become even richer and just aren't really too just inept at being great basketball, just figureheads. And usually these guys are very high involvement guys where usually when owners are very high involvement, it's usually worse rather than better.
Yeah, with the Rangers and Knicks, I mean the Rangers are pretty good this year. I think they might be 5th in like the NHL format. We can talk about that later in the episode if you want, but kind of the Knicks and the Rangers, they play in Madison Square Garden, so they're gonna sell out every game regardless if they're good or bad. And the Knicks, courtside seats are gonna be filled with stars regardless if they're good or bad. That's why they're just considered one of the top, like the wealthy teams in the leagues, because they play in that arena and they play in that city no matter how bad they are, no matter how good they are.
Yeah, it's crazy that New York is considered like quote unquote the mecca of sports, but I really they haven't even had the talent in New York recently. I mean, obviously you got guys historically like A-Rod, Derek Jeter, but I mean besides that, the biggest football star that's been in New York over the past 10 years has been maybe Odell Beckham potentially. I mean, in New York for basketball, the biggest star that's been there obviously now is Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, but besides that,
Anthony.
Yeah, Carmelo Anthony, certainly. That's why a lot of Knicks fans, and even me as just kind of a tri-state area guy, really does appreciate and loves Carmelo Anthony because he's really the only star historically in the history of the New York Knicks.
Yeah.
Because obviously Patrick Ewing got drafted. He had no choice to be a Knick. He's really the historically only guy to actually want to be a New York Knick, which is just kind of incredible to think about.
Yeah, and then you have someone who wants to be a New York Knick that would probably sign with you in the offseason. Then they're like, nah, we can't wait. Let's do it right now and trade our whole team for him.
Just very impatient. I mean, you had at some point Pablo Prigioni, who's like, a 35-year-old rookie rolling out there. I know even in the height of the Miami Heat dynasty where they had old men after old men on that roster, I think the New York Knicks were still rolling out the oldest roster in the NBA. You had an old Tyson Chandler. I mean, just an older Carmelo Anthony. Just
Baron Davis.
Again, just old players. I know the fan base and everybody was kind of upset when they didn't re-sign Jeremy Lin as well. And what could have been of Jeremy Lin's career if he stayed in New York? I think that's a really exciting kind of what if to think about.
Yeah, I mean, goes to New York, can't win anything, goes to Toronto and wins a championship. That just shows like the different ends of the spectrum right away.
Yeah, no, it really does. He's kind of right place, right time. Talking about right place, right time, Patrick McCaw, the role player who's on the Warriors, really didn't do anything. I know it was kind of a weird situation. After he won his second championship in 2 years with the Warriors, he like ghosted the team for an entire offseason, didn't return any calls, texts, didn't show up. And I think the team just kind of parted ways with him. Ended up signing with the Toronto Raptors, of course. He was kind of a bench role player and really just won another championship kind of riding the bench like Jeremy Lin just did. Obviously, we're kind of joking about Jeremy Lin with his success with the Raptors because he didn't really play for him too much. But it was a really weird case with Patrick McCaw because I know there was a game where I believe Vince Carter ended up coming down on Patrick McCaw's head
Yeah,
or
on the
neck.
spine or something, right?
Yeah, and I know Steve Kerr was so mad at Vince Carter for doing that. He was like, "Come on, Vince, you know better than doing that." Vince Carter is actually, I know we're getting so off topic here, but Vince Carter, for the majority of his career, was very hated by a lot of NBA fans, very hated by the Toronto Raptors fan base because of the kind of drama and situation that happened there. And I think just there's such a kind of recency bias in the NBA where everyone loves Vince Carter now, but people really did truly hate Vince Carter for the majority of his career, honestly.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure when he was on the Nets, when they were in the NBA Finals, like he was out extremely late, like the night before,
Yeah.
for his graduation or something like that, and that really kind of hurt their chances of competing in that series against the Lakers, and that kind of derailed their hopes.
Yeah, I know a lot of people in the media, even his teammates, made fun of him because apparently before every game, every single day, he'd consult his mom for basically everything, every single situation, every decision he ever made. He had to run it by his mom first, and I know a lot of people gave him a lot of shit for that. And kind of whenever you see kind of NBA players, you can always tell, in my opinion, when a lot of people are in NBA players' ears. I think Kyrie Irving is another example of this, obviously Kawhi Leonard, where it's really not even them necessarily making all the basketball and just personal decisions in their life. It's a lot of their family members who are kind of power hungry as well in their kind of own sense.
Yeah, I think that was a big point with Kawhi when he was on the Spurs. I think kind of his inner circle was telling him not to play with the Spurs and kind of
Yeah.
sit out. I think that kind of hurt because Kawhi is obviously a quiet guy, so I think he might have been taken advantage of a little bit and like people telling him what to do.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, that whole situation was just kind of just weird how it kind of ended with them. I really do think he was justified in leaving the Spurs. I lost a lot of respect for Greg Popovich with how he handled the situation. He kind of tarnished his name a little bit in the media. He went to kind of his teammates. I know Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili kind of talked shit about him at some point in the season when he was sitting out, kind of questioning the legitimacy of his injury. I know Tony Parker made a very public announcement where apparently Greg Popovich told them to kind of compare the same injury that Kawhi had with the same injury Tony Parker had a couple of years prior and saying, well, it didn't take me nearly this long to recover from it. So I think they're just bad blood with the Spurs at that point, and I think it was really justified for him to move on and just for him to evolve as a player. Obviously, Kawhi Leonard wouldn't be Kawhi Leonard without the Spurs organization. No way, but still, I think to really catapult him to be the third best player in the NBA, which I did think he was at some point, I do think he need to leave the Spurs.
Yeah, but I don't know. It was just a little like uneasy that he was cleared by the team physician like multiple times and he just didn't play. But yeah, just the evolution of Kawhi is unlike any other because if he wins the NBA Finals and he's a Finals MVP, I believe he's the only player in NBA history to be named Finals MVP and win the NBA championship with 3 different teams. So obviously the Spurs, Raptors, and then potentially the Clippers this year.
That'd catapult him into elite company. Now, I know Bleacher Report just recently did Hall of Fame odds for current NBA players, and Kawhi Leonard was extremely low on that list. And a lot of people were surprised about that, but I think Kawhi Leonard has something around 8,000 career NBA points, and so many notable players, so many unnotable players have significantly more just kind of accolades in the stat book than Kawhi Leonard. But of course, I think that's silly because Kawhi Leonard, again, he's a 2-time final MVP. I mean, he's won 3 NBA championships at this point in his NBA career. Or no, I think he's only won 2. But regardless, he's been the 3. I mean, he's just been an absolutely great player. But really touching upon your injury, I know he's gotten cleared by the doctors countless times for the Spurs, for the Raptors, even for the Clippers now. But I really do think he's been consistently injured and playing injured since 2015, which is really incredible to think about. But I remember the second after the Raptors won the championship, there's a soundbite by Kawhi saying, now I could start limping again. Like I can not hide my limp anymore. So I really do think he's just been playing hurt for a very long time. And I don't even think he's in the bubble yet. So we'll see what happens with Kawhi Leonard.
Yeah, I think not all players are in the bubble. I saw James Harden arrive to the bubble today or yesterday, but yeah, I think Kawhi's been beat up quite a bit throughout his career. Obviously, that notable injury when he shot the 3-point shot in the corner and Zaza kind of, I don't know if it was on purpose or by accident, kind of put his foot under Kawhi, so he injured his ankle when he was coming down. But obviously that series, I think the Spurs could have won that series. They were whipping the Warriors in that game that he got hurt. I think that was it might have been game 1 or game 2. But
yeah, it was game 1.
Pretty handily, and then obviously a huge tide turned when Kawhi was left the game. So that just shows how good Kawhi is, because he was going head to head with the top team one of the top teams in the Western Conference, and he was beating them pretty much himself.
Yeah, and not to kind of bash Greg Popovich here, but I do think that's the worst coaching job he's ever done in game 1 of that series, because I mean, the Spurs, like you said, they had him absolutely beat. They had him on the ropes. They were just killing him all game. Schematically, they were killing him. He was just absolutely overpowering Steve Kerr and company. But then, again, they're up 28 points. I believe it was exactly 28 points. Kawhi Leonard goes down with that injury late in the third quarter. I think there was only a couple minutes left in the third quarter. And the Warriors ended up winning that game by a considerable amount. So not only did the Golden State Warriors come back by 28 in the fourth quarter, but they beat them pretty good at the end of the day, and they ended up sweeping them in that series. So I know there is that large narrative that they would have won with Kawhi, and I do think they could have won a couple of games with Kawhi, but again, I just think the Warriors at that point kind of overmatched and overpowered the Spurs. But it's really interesting to look at the Warriors finals run. Every single year they've made a finals run, they've really had shaky playoff runs. Just so many series where, even looking back at that Rockets series where they were beat. If Chris Paul played in that game 7, they would have probably lost. And again, obviously they went down 3-1 against the Thunder. I mean, they probably should have lost in 2015 to the Cavaliers if it wasn't for multiple injuries for the Cavaliers. Obviously, they melt down in 2016. Even 2017, they had some rough outings against some teams. Like I said, the Rockets, of course, for example. So, I mean, when winning NBA championships, it's very situational. It takes not only you to be great, but I think it takes a lot of situations where teams are injured and other teams flat out just kind of have a meltdown.
Yeah, I think with looking at their finals resume and playoff resume, they did get a lot of big breaks. Sadly, those breaks were injuries, but they did get a lot of breaks in their little their dynasty era.
Yeah, kind of going back to the point you said about the Houston Rockets and James Harden just arrived to the bubble for whatever reason. Russell Westbrook's not even in the bubble yet. Some teams have been practicing for weeks. Hell, the Lakers have probably been practicing for months. It's just really disappointing to see kind of the lack of intensity coming from the Houston Rockets organization, the lack of just focus and kind of seriousness coming from their 2 stars at this point, in my opinion, in James Harden and Russell Westbrook, because like we talked about in just a very recent podcast, they really have such high stakes in this finals. I was looking at kind of top shooting guard ranks of all time. I legitimately think if James Harden wins 1 to 2 NBA finals, I think he can go down as the 3rd best shooting guard of all time. But again, he can't do that without at least 1 or 2 finals under his belt. So again, the time is ticking for James Harden and this Rockets team, and they're not really taking it seriously, in my opinion.
Yeah, James Harden should have been like the first person inside the bubble, honestly. Yeah. Russell Westbrook tested positive for corona, so he has to sit out for a couple weeks. But yeah, James Harden should have been the first one there, ready to train and get his finals. Because I don't know, I think just the trend with his whole career, he's just very lackadaisical and kind of not a hard work. I mean, obviously he definitely works hard being the skill level he is, but from the outside perspective, it seems like he's not a hardworking guy on the court and outside of the court.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, compared to the average human being, I'm sure he's more hardworking than any of us, really. But once you get into the sphere the sphere of NBA players. I mean, these are whole different animals, whole different beasts. And yeah, you could say that James Harden, hell, I would put John Wall in that category. I think John Wall is the king of coming into a season out of shape, looking like he hasn't picked up a basketball in 3 months. But I mean, again, James Harden is a guy where every single playoff run he's broken down, he's looked tired, he's looked slow, which I mean, he's still, if you look at his raw numbers against the Warriors in some of the past series, they're still good. He's still putting up 30 points a game. He's still doing his thing, but again, it's kind of the style of the Mike D'Antoni Rockets, along with, again, just the lack of intensity and focus and training and just laziness on a NBA level, of course, that is, from James Harden. It's really disappointing. He's one of those players where, man, he could have gone down as the greatest player of all time if he had a killer instinct and if he had a killer mentality, just a killer kind of work ethic like the all-times great do.
Yeah, segueing to the NFL a little bit. So obviously, I mean, there's not much news coming out of the NFL world, but Yannick Ngakoue still wants to trade, but he said that he would sign kind of a 1-year franchise tag tender with any other team besides the Jaguars. So that just shows how far gone the Jaguars really are from their 1-year run that they had just a couple years ago.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I think the biggest news coming out of the Ngakoue kind of saga, along with Fournette, is really that the trade market in the NFL, especially for the Jaguars, but NFL players in general, is absolutely non-existent. I mean, nobody, even just great players. We see slot cornerback who is great for Denver for so many years, Chris Harris Jr., trade for a 4th-round pick. We saw Darius Slay, who's a bona fide top 10 cornerback year in and year out, get traded for, again, a 4th-round pick. I mean, you see even DeAndre Hopkins gets traded for a washed-up running back, a huge contract, and a 2nd-round pick. So, I mean, just really the biggest takeaway I have from this is, even if you're a really great player, kind of 2nd-tier edge rusher like Ngakoue is, can't even get a trade out of him. You can't get value out of him, which I think is just kind of surprising.
Yeah, I feel like coaches, they don't really want to trade for players because I think they want to get players that work for their system. So they're kind of skeptical about trading and giving up assets for players that they're not really sure will work for their system because it's not who they drafted, it's not who they handpicked and signed. So I think that's kind of what makes it a little skeptical. But I think a team that should go after Ngakoue are the Seattle Seahawks, because if they potentially lose to Jadeveon Clowney, obviously the season's coming ever so closer, and he still hasn't signed with anyone. So I don't know if he returns to Seattle, but I think say the Seattle Seahawks do lose Clowney, I think Ngakoue if they just trade the Jaguars kind of late round picks and they can easily get him, I think that would be a good move for them.
Yeah, I really wouldn't be surprised to see Ngakoue play on the Jaguars this season because, again, no other team is going to want to trade. I know a lot of teams probably want him, but I don't think anybody's going to trade significant assets for him at this point. But once the Jaguars kind of realize that and say, just got to get rid of him for something, even like a 5th-round pick, which is just an absolute steal for whoever gets him, I really do think he's going to get traded to a team, like you said, like Seattle, where their money's tied up. They're going to have Ngakoue for 1 season, but just for a really great, deep playoff run, a potential Super Bowl run, because Ngakoue is going to be commanding a lot of money. We just saw 2 edge players in Chris Jones and Myles Garrett, of course, get not in guarantee money, but in total money, potentially over $20 million a season. So I think Ngakoue is going to want around 15, 16. So most contending teams aren't going to want to offer him that. Most rebuilding teams aren't going to want to offer him that. So maybe you have your middle of the road kind of, you're always decent, never good enough to get a top 5 pick, but never good enough to truly make a playoff run. Maybe you see a team like that, like potentially the Cleveland Browns, try to get him in to add value to him. But again, whoever trades for Ngakoue, I don't think is going to sign him to a long-year deal, like what happened with Jadeveon Clowney with the Seahawks.
Yeah, I think, like you said, I think it might be one of those teams that trade for him to try to catapult them into a Super Bowl conversation, but I don't even think like Super Bowl teams would be would want him. I don't know.
Yeah.
He just seems like a kind of a circus around him. I mean, I think he is a great player. I think he's coming off his first Pro Bowl season. I think he is one of those second-tier pass rushers that is potentially a game changer, but
Yeah.
I don't know if he's really worth it, the trade for at this point.
Yeah, he's really not. I know a lot of people are anticipating the Jaguars of being the worst team in the league next year, and I don't know if that's going to happen potentially, but I mean, Tom Coughlin really left this organization in absolute ruins. I mean, he just ruined the entire culture that this team had instilled and really did a great job instilling. So, I mean, that's really a mistake, bringing in a more traditional guy where your roster's already great, your team's already great, you just made it to an AFC championship. Then right after that, they really signed Tom Coughlin. Everything kind of went downhill from there at that point. So that was just kind of an interesting, puzzling move that the Jaguars ended up making, and ended up seeing so many guys like Jalen Ramsey, like A.J. Bourne, just so many guys who are so good just leave the team.
Yeah, and then also another big football news, like you said, the 2 contracts, Myles Garrett and Chris Jones. Somehow the Chiefs, I thought it would be a struggle to sign Chris Jones. I thought he was definitely going to be gone because there was talks of him holding out, but somehow they're able to pay him. So I don't know what the ripple effect of that is going to be with kind of signing their weapons. I think Sammy Watkins said he would 100% take a pay cut to stay on the roster because he'd rather win championships than get a lot of money from a poor team. But I'm shocked that they're able to sign Chris Jones.
Yeah, I'm absolutely shocked that they ended up making this move too. I mean, they have absolutely no cap space, not only for this season, next season, for the foreseeable future, which is a little bit troublesome for this team. I mean, in the NFL, it's not really a league where like in the NBA, you have so many guys, so many veteran guys who used to be really good, take a large pay cuts to go to teams. Not really a common occurrence in the NFL, though it does happen sometimes. I mean, obviously Sammy Watkins is at the position he was drafted, a top 10 pick for a wide receiver. Certainly didn't live up to those expectations. Nonetheless, still a really good wide receiver. But, I mean, for the Chiefs, you're going to have some really, really, really shaky talent on that defense, I think, in a couple of years, because we just saw last season, I mean, this defense went from really bad to really good, and I think they could potentially be a very bad defensive unit in a couple of years, which is going to be potentially pretty disastrous. So I don't know how smart, I know Chris Jones, again, is a really good football player, but I don't know how smart this move was, tying him up to such a big contract.
I think this year they're going to repeat as Super Bowl championships or Super Bowl champions. But after some of their more key players are on contract or at the end of their deals, I think they're going to lose a lot of players, and that's where they're going to really struggle to be a good team. I mean, obviously we bring up the point time and time after the Seattle Seahawks giving so much money to Russell Wilson, and obviously they're just putting up together kind of mummified rosters because they just can't really afford anyone else. So I think that we can potentially be seeing that with the Kansas City Chiefs in a couple of years.
Yeah, I really don't like this move because with front seven, it really is, you need your entire front seven to be good, or you at least need 2 good edge rushers to pressure the quarterback, because, I mean, we even saw in the Super Bowl last year, I know the 49ers had a great front seven, like an all-time great front seven, but, I mean, the Chiefs really did neutralize that front seven. They had guys like Mitchell Schwartz who could go one-on-one with a really good player and kind of neutralize them. So that's why you always need, or even just double team some of their guys. So that's why you always need multiple guys, so you can't just double team Chris Jones. But I think in a couple of years, you're going to have some very below average edge guys around Chris Jones. And I mean, that's going to be really disastrous. I think the edge rusher and wide receiver are the 2 positions where you want to have multiple good ones, because, again, with a wide receiver, if you have one good wide receiver, he's going to get double teamed all game. Again, if you have one good edge rusher, he's going to get double teamed all game, and he's going to be neutralized. So, I mean, we see it all the time, like guys like Juju Smith-Schuster who kind of fall off the face of the earth after their superstar wide receiver leaves them, just because he's so good at getting second-tier cornerbacks on him with single man-to-man coverage. I mean, Juju Smith is going to win, but now that he's the focal point of his offense, he's kind of relegated to an average number 1 wide receiver. And I think a similar thing could happen with Chris Jones, where he's still going to be really good, but he's certainly not going to have a great effect on the game if the Chiefs can't surround him with really good talent.
Yeah, if you look at the Broncos when they won the Super Bowl, obviously that defense was loaded, but teams had to focus on Von Miller so much that it opened up things for DeMarcus Ware, Derek Wolfe, all these other players. So, I mean, the Chiefs are allocating so much money for Chris Jones, but that's going to hurt them in the long run. I really think so.
Yeah, certainly. And I think it's really interesting that Myles Garrett, after the season he's certainly going to be at least the first 2 games of the season. I would imagine, I think a 6-game suspension is going to happen with Myles Garrett, which is going to be the longest football suspension of all time for a on-the-field incident, which is pretty crazy to think about. But again, Myles Garrett, I mean, with the Browns, they're just allocating such big contracts to so many unproven players. Now, I know Myles Garrett is a really good edge defender, but how many wins and losses does he contribute to your team? They just signed a guy like Austin Hooper, where he's not a game changer. He's such a good safety blanket. He is really good at finding a way open, but it's not like he's going to kill you. I mean, obviously, you're paying Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry so much money. You're going to have to pay Nick Chubb. You're going to have to pay Kareem Hunt if you don't want him to walk. You're going to have to pay your quarterback, Baker Mayfield. You're going to have to pay some really high-end offensive guard talent, offensive just line talent if some of their signings do prove to be very good. They still have some guys on the defensive end at the cornerback position like Greedy Williams, who you're going to have to end up paying at some point. So, I mean, the Cleveland Browns, they're the example of, and the poster child of a poorly run organization, even right now with their new GM, because they're allocating such big money to so many guys where they don't even know if their roster is going to be good.
Yeah, I mean, they have notable stars and great players on their team, but I think they're going to really fall apart when they have to start paying these guys. But because they don't have, I think the excuse with the Chiefs is they have Patrick Mahomes, so that's going to keep them good. But Baker's unproven, so they don't really have that excuse to use for paying some of these guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a case where it's like the 2016 Giants. I remember that offseason for them. They brought in Olivier Vernon. They brought in, I think, Jack Rabbit that offseason. They brought in Snacks Harrison. They brought in so many like high-end defenders and allocated so much big money to them. And everyone was like, oh, the Giants are Super Bowl bound. They're going to be such a great team this season. They're going to be such a great team for years to come. Look at this defensive core they put together. And I remember just saying, you just allocated your entire salary cap to guys who are unproven on this football team, to a football team that's unproven, a football team that hasn't made a playoff run since they won the Super Bowl a couple years ago. I mean, potentially it's going to lock you up, and deals like this, deals like the Myles Garrett deal, deals like the Austin Hooper deal, they hinder your team and they allow you to be bad for a couple next seasons because you can't sign any good players where you realize you have holes at that position.
Yeah, a lot of big money being thrown around in football, but teams are it's trial and error really. But
yep.
Thank you everybody for listening. We hope you enjoy this one, and we'll see you in the next one.